This is the development portion of behavioral science and psychiatry for Falcon Physician Reviews. In the next couple of slides, we'll be discussing the different child developmental theories described by Freud, Erikson, and Piaget. And what these theories will show us is that many discrete elements are integrated to make a whole person. And not one whole theory is satisfactory. For example, Freud's theory actually only goes up to adolescence. And Erikson's stages covers entire lifetime. And Piaget also only goes up to adolescence. There are different stages in development of childhood, and it's a useful concept to analyze behavior. So Freud uses a psychosexual developmental stage, Erikson uses an epigenetic model, and Piaget uses an acquisition of a new schema and also uses cognitive abilities of the child in his developmental stages. As I said before, Freud was looking at the sexual aims of young infants to obtain pleasure and relief from discomfort by the most immediate means possible. His developmental stages are 5 in number. First, it starts off with the oral stage, followed by the anal, phallic, latency, and genital. In the next couple of slides, we'll go through these different stages. Now, this is probably one of the hardest parts to remember for the USMLE. What I would do, though, is to really pay attention to the headings of each stage and to imagine what those words mean and what they would mean to a young child. So for those of you that have children, this would probably be a little bit easier. Then you have your phallic or Oedipal stage, which is from the ages of 3 to 5 years old. And this is when the kids really know. They're starting to talk a lot more. They're starting to identify, oh, am I a boy? Am I a girl? They're curious about pregnancy, childbirth, death. They are sexually stimulated in their genital area. Also, a complex phenomenon called the Oedipal phase occurs during this time. So a female baby will have feelings towards her father and will want to kill off her mother because of the relationship that she has with her father. Also, a child will have fantasies. They will play mommy, daddy, doctor, or nurse. And they are very exhibitionistic and possessive. Next, you'll have the latency phase, which is between the ages of 5 and 12. During this latency phase, this is when the sexuality really decreases. And this is when kids can differentiate between reality and fantasy, and their defense mechanisms are strengthened. During latency is when they first start going to school. It starts when they go to kindergarten. So this is when kids are really trying to learn to play together. They're doing more organized sports. They'll also start collections, things like that. But the sexual stuff is left behind in this latency age. Then again, you have the genital stage, which is from 12 to young adulthood, and this is when you get the maturation of the sexual functioning. This is adolescence, and when they're exploring themselves more sexually, understanding their identities, and that's where the genital phase comes in. When development fails to progress through Freudian stages, it is called as fixation. So again, here is a table to go through the different phases of Freud's development. First, again, you have the oral phase, which is surrounded by the mouth, which is the sucking and biting. And the key tasks and experiences during this time is weaning from the breast or bottle. Then you have your anal phase, which is from ages 1 to 3, which is revolved around your expelling or retaining feces around your anus. And the key tasks and experiences during this time is toilet training. Then the phallic phase, which is from the ages of 3 to 6, which is around your genitals and masturbating. And again, the key task during this time is the Oedipal crisis. Latency is ages 6 to 12. At this time, they are sexually repressed, and the key task is expanding social contacts. They're first going to school, they're learning to play sports, play together. Again, the last phase is the genital phase, which is ages 12 to adulthood. Again, the erotic focus here, just like in the phallic phase, is the genitals, and the key tasks and experiences here are generation of new life, learning of self-identity. Next we have Erikson stages. And Erikson stages are 8 stages, and they go from birth all the way till the end of life. And Erikson felt that the failure to meet the goals causes developmental arrest. So your first stage is trust versus mistrust. And again, with Erikson stages, if you can look at the different stages of what they're called, like trust versus mistrust, it'll help you to understand what goes on that phase instead of just blindly memorizing what it is. Because if you just try to memorize it, it'll be really hard to remember, and you'll find yourself forgetting it on the exam. So if you can look at the topic of, okay, trust versus mistrust, what does that mean to a child, then you can probably more easily remember it. So trust versus mistrust is from the ages of 0 to 1. So if you think about it again, what does a baby do from ages of 0 to 1? They sleep, they eat, they go to the bathroom. And they require solely all their tasks done by their family or by their parents. They have to be fed, somebody has to change their diaper, someone has to move them around. So a child will develop trust if they have a parent or family that takes very good care of them, that takes care of their needs. But a child with mistrust will have someone who does not care for them, does not pick them up while they're crying. So if you get arrested in this phase, or if you don't have a very good early upbringing, these people have a very hard time trusting people as they get older. The second stage is autonomy versus shame and doubt, and this covers the ages of 1 to 3 years old. And during this time, if you look at the word autonomy, what does that mean? That means to do things on their own. And around the age of 1 is when kids really start learning how to walk, and they're learning to get away from their mother and father. They're increasing their motor skills. They have a choice of holding on or letting go. And where shame and doubt comes in is that they become ashamed if they're punished for their autonomy or if they're over-controlled. Also, if you think about it, around the ages of 2, kids frequently use the word no. And what does no mean? It seems like it's an act of defiance. But really, when kids say no, they're trying to increase their autonomy, they're trying to get their separateness from their family. So that is, again, why this fits into the stages of 1 to 3. And if you don't give the child enough autonomy, if you don't let the child learn to pull away, they start feeling shamed. Stage 3 is initiative versus guilt, ages 3 to 6. Again, child is increasing in their motor and genital and intellectual activities. If they are made to feel inadequate about any of these behaviors, they develop a sense of guilt about self-initiated activities. Stage 4 is industry versus inferiority. This is the ages of 6 to 12, and this correlates with Freud's latency stage. And here, industry refers to the ability to do work and develop adult skills. So at the age of 6 is when you're starting to go to kindergarten, first grade. You're really learning to increase your cognitive abilities. You're really learning to write and read. So the child really learns about the pleasure of completing different tasks. And a child will get inferiority if he does not give in support or if he's unable to master these tasks. Stage 5 is identity versus role diffusion. So if you think back to when you were in adolescence, which is basically where this stage is from the ages of 12 to the ages of 20, if you remember, that was the age when you're trying to break away from your parents, you're deciding if you should go to college, you're deciding on what you should do in college, what kind of person you want to be. So that's where identity comes in. This is a time period for adolescents to really figure out who they are. They try different roles throughout the social interactions. They decide which characteristics they like about different people and incorporate them into self. Now, what does role diffusion mean? Well, that means that the adolescent will not be able to master this stage, and they will feel like they don't have a sense of identity, and they will feel confused about their place in this world. The next stage is intimacy versus isolation, and this stage spans between the ages of 20 to 40. So what does the word intimacy mean? Intimacy means this is the phase of life where you're really starting to get close to that specific someone. You're forming very close relationships where you're very trusting. And, you know, between your ages of 20 and 40 is when most people start getting married, having their long-term relationships. So a person who will be able to get through all the other stages thus far will easily be able to have an intimate sexual relationship and have deep friendships. But if you aren't able to navigate through the previous stages and you come to this place, then you'll have a hard time forming long-term relationships and you will end up being self-absorbed and isolated. And that's where the isolation comes in. Stage 7 is generativity versus stagnation, and this is from the ages of 40 to 65. So if you think about those ages, generativity means being able to guide the next generation and improving society, teaching your children what you have learned thus far, helping out the community. That's where generativity is. And stagnation is that if the patient or the person has not mastered the previous stages, he's unable to give, he's isolated, self-involved. The last stage is stage 8, which is integrity versus despair. So this is covering the last phase of life, which is ages 65 and over. And integrity refers to a sense of satisfaction that one feels that they have accomplished everything that they had planned on accomplishing in their life. And despair reflects that their life has little purpose or meaning. So if you can look through all these stages and look at the headings, you can figure out what they're referring to instead of just memorizing them without thinking about what the top headings mean. The next stage of development is Piaget's development. And as I said before, Piaget used schema as well as he looked at the cognitive abilities of the child. What is a schema? A schema is a pattern of behavior in response to a particular stimulus from the environment. So an example of this would be if you learned when you were younger that you would never get raped if you were in a well-lit area or in a safe area, and then you get raped in one of those areas, then your underlying schema would be broken. So your underlying schema is that I can stay safe in a well-lit area. Again, as I said before, Piaget considered the learning capabilities of a child during each stage. So he looked at the cognitive functioning of each child at the stages. Your first stage is your sensory motor stage, which is from birth to 2 years old. And this is how the child reacts to any sensory stimulation, such as touching from the mom, feeding from the mom, reassurance from the parents. An important part of the sensory motor stage is object permanence, which means that the child can maintain a mental image of an object, and this usually develops during the second year of life. And what this means is that if you were to give a small baby a toy and then put it behind your back, a very young baby, maybe at 6 months, would think that the toy had disappeared forever. But if you gave a 12 or an 18-month baby, if you showed them that this toy had disappeared under the blanket, they would probably go and look for the toy underneath the blanket. So that's what object permanence. The next stage is pre-operational thought, and this is from the ages of 2 to 6 years old. And there are 3 main functions or 3 main topics that are important in the pre-operational thought. First is egocentric thinking. Now, if you see a 2-year-old who's playing and he does something that he thinks is great, and he stops and he looks around to see if everybody else is going to start clapping for him, well, that's what that means. He thinks that everyone and everything revolves around him. The world revolves around the infant. They also have failure of conservation. An example of this means that if you were to give a child a tall, skinny glass and a short, fat glass, and you put the same amount of liquids, the child would say that the tall, skinny glass had more liquid in it than the short, fat glass, which means that they're not able to tell the difference of the liquids based on the fact that there's the same amount. They think that because they're in a different container, that's what makes the difference in the amount of water. And again, magical thinking and fantasy is intertwined with reality. Frequently in this age group, you will see kids having imaginary friends, which is very common. Stage 3 is concrete operations. This is the time when kids are starting to go to school, they're developing rational and logical thought, they're able to understand other people's points of views, and also here they understand conservation. So again, if you gave them the skinny tall glass and the fat short glass, they would be able to tell that there was the same amount of water in both. And your final stage, which is stage 4, is formal operations, which is from the ages of 12 years old and on. And here, this is when the kids are really thinking very abstractly, they're generalizing, they're using metaphors and deductive reasoning. And this is a very advanced level of thinking, very similar to how adults think. So here's a table to help you see how all these stages fit together. And this kind of material is probably best if you can stick this on your wall and look at it when you're walking by multiple times. It's very difficult to just remember by reading it one time through. But if you can, again, look at the different headings for each of the theories, it will make it much easier for you to remember.